Hi, my name is Jorge Martinez, and I'm the editor and senior compositor on Mermaids on Mars. So in addition to doing editing, compositing, I also did a number of other things, such as some animation and some sound recording, different types of manipulation to the picture. So I've been kind of a jack of all trades for Mermaids on Mars. So editing live action is a lot different than editing for stop motion. With live action, we already had the footage, so we'd bring that in and then we'd decide what we wanted to cut or see how different pieces of footage work with others. Now, when we were doing the stop motion editing, we were taking the storyboards and creating the timing ourselves. Between John and I, we would sit down and figure out, well, how long would this character take to do this movement or to say these lines? And we'd lay down that kind of template, which we then gave to the animators to roughly fit. Now, when we got the footage back from the animators, sometimes there'd be some variations. So we'd put that back into the cut, and then we'd make further decisions like, oh, well, maybe we should trim this a little more, or extend it a little more. But more or less, it was already set. So basically, when you're editing for stop motion, you're kind of determining how the film's going to end up being shot. Whereas vice versa, when you're editing for live action, what was shot determines how you're going to edit it. So it's kind of a flip-flop of the process. So I suppose my view of editing might be a little different than the industry standard, and my take on it is something more of an intuitive process. I have a background in music, so I'm fairly aware of timing and tempo, rhythm. And I know that sounds a little abstract, but I guess my approach is more of an intuitive approach to editing. So another thing I was asked to do during the filmmaking is to do a little bit of filling in for animation. And I've done a small amount of animation before, but this was really my first major attempt at doing stop motion. Some of the biggest challenges I faced while doing this were, as you're doing the process, you have to be really careful not to move things in the wrong way. Even the slightest amount can completely change the shot from one moment to the next. Like, you might have the character being very still and then suddenly it jerks to another location. So basically, it's a matter of making sure that doesn't happen, or if it does, to cover your tracks as well as possible. Something I really enjoy about doing stop motion animation is that it's very similar to puppetry, which I've always had a passion for puppetry, and I'm a huge Jim Henson fan. So to translate my real-time movements of my hand to something like a small puppet over a stop motion time, it comes naturally to me. So for the end sequence, we filmed it out by the water, and there was a lot of wind, a lot of traffic sounds from there's a highway really nearby, and so we couldn't really use that sound. So what we had to do instead was replace it. So the actors came into the studio and we tried to get them to match what we had filmed as closely as possible. So what we would do is we would take a segment of the film and we'd loop it over and over and over, and they'd record it and say the line over and over until they got pretty comfortable and were matching it pretty well. So once we were done with the ADR session, we were left with only the dialogue and no environment sounds. So our sound designer had to go in and recreate or put in sound effects and things like the water splashing or things like the wind or birds, and in fact ended up making the background sound even better. So nearing the completion of the post-production of the film, I was asked to make the end sequence into a day for night, which is basically taking something that was shot during the day and making it look like it's nighttime. It's one of these challenges that I like figuring out how to make things work, how to make things happen. So I was able to make the sky look like it's night with putting stars in the background and putting a moon in there, and basically giving it a very dreamy feel. I've been asked to what's some of the hardest things that I've worked on here. You might think that working on complex visual effects is kind of a difficult thing, but actually that's one of the things I enjoy doing most. Because the way my mind works, I'm able to work out, do some problem solving and try to figure out how to make things connect to each other. For me, that comes easily, that comes naturally. So I guess the hardest thing for me is to keep my hands off of certain shots, to leave them as is.